Good afternoon. I hope everyone is doing well during this pandemic, and I know it's been very hard on a lot of people. So thank you for taking the time today to attend this webinar. I am Lisa Gieskes, and I will be your moderator today. So please see the SCLA website at scla.org to find our future webinars and propose your own. I would like to introduce Erin Glenn, Reference Librarian at the University of South Carolina's Law Library. Feel free to ask questions in the chat box during the presentation. I will compile the questions and our presenter will address them at the end. Please be sure to mute your microphones. And if you could turn off your video camera in order to save on bandwidth, that will help. And if you have technical problems, again, please use the chat box. To make the screen of the PowerPoint bigger, you may click on Hide Everyone, and you can zoom in or out of the PowerPoint screen. You can also take screenshots of the PowerPoint screen, and after the webinar, a link to the recording and the PowerPoint slides will be sent out to registered participants. Just to let people know, we have a YouTube channel for later viewing for all of our webinars. We archive them. So now I will send it over to our wonderful presenter. And again, thank you, everyone. And take it away, Erin.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Erin Glenn, and I'm a reference librarian at the University of South Carolina Law Library. And I'd like to welcome everyone to part 2 of our 5-part legal research webinar series. Today's is on using secondary sources and topical research guides to help your patrons with legal research. The topics for part 1 and for parts 3 through 5 are listed on the last slide of this presentation. You can also find more information on this series on the South Carolina Library Association's website, and you can register for additional webinars on the State Library's website. If you do register for another webinar, please take a moment to complete the brief survey that is linked in that webinar's description. We really appreciate it. All right, so kind of lay out where we're going today. I'd like to speak on a few different topics today. We'll be talking about how we can make the best use, again, of secondary sources and topical research guides to assist with legal research. I'm going to briefly talk about some considerations to keep in mind when selecting materials for a legal collection. And if you see a particular resource or type of resource that looks helpful, I'd invite you to make a note of that as we proceed through the presentation. And again, I'll be able to answer questions towards the end. As we'll see, legal secondary sources come in many different forms, and some will be more useful than others in certain situations. We'll also be able to discuss topical research guides, such as those found in the Law Library's Circuit Writers Basic Legal Research Training Guide. During part of the discussion, I'll highlight a few of these topical guides, and I've got a few that I can share with everyone, but I'd invite anyone who'd be interested in seeing the guide for a particular topic on that page to let us know in the chat box, and we can preview that guide as well. All right, and as was mentioned before, we'll have some time at the end of the presentation to address any questions. All right, so the first thing I'd like to speak about is one of the tabs that we have in our Circuit Writers Guide. This is on building a basic legal collection. And, you know, in thinking about this, I'd like us to keep in mind those questions that we are often asked and what materials would be best to address those questions and concerns. This page in the Circuit Writers Guide talks about forming a basic legal research collection, and it gives some suggestions on resources that could be generally useful. Some information can be located for free online. You know, a lot of these are the topical research guides that I'll talk about, not only from the University of South Carolina, but also from other institutions. And these can be good resources to link to and to kind of maybe fill in some gaps where you may not have something in your collection at the moment that addresses that concern. And keep in mind also that you don't have to have everything immediately. materials can be collected over time to best address the legal needs in your community. And you may get some questions much more frequently than others based on your location and just what's important to people in your area. And again, as we think about building this collection, one of the things that to keep in mind is we're looking to provide access to basic legal resources, print and electronic, that are going to be generally useful to our patrons. So as we keep talking about materials for today, again, today's focus is going to be on secondary sources. The other legal research webinars that are coming up in this series will talk more about primary sources of law, but my focus is going to be on secondary legal resources. Again, when we're talking about the law, those primary sources are materials that are the law in a particular jurisdiction. Things like federal and state constitutions, statutes and ordinances, rules and regulations, and court opinions or cases. These sources again are the law of a particular jurisdiction, and these are the kinds of documents that are often cited as authority to back up legal arguments and claims. And as you'll see in the other webinars coming up, fortunately, many state and federal government websites offer free online access to these primary law materials. However, coverage can vary. For example, the website of the South Carolina Legislature provides coverage from the year 2000 to the present for the South Carolina Code of Laws, our general statutory law of the state. However, pre-2000 versions of the current code aren't available from the legislature's website. And while it's wonderful to have access to so much primary legal information online, this information is often presented without annotations or other reading aids to help a non-lawyer understand the law. If you have a print set of the South Carolina Code, that includes annotations that are going to give this and help the vote understand the context of that particular law. It'll give them notes to cases that might be relevant. However, oftentimes, as is the case with the South Carolina Code from the South Carolina Legislature's website, it's not going to include all of those annotations. And so it may be difficult for a patron to understand the law just as it's presented. A lot of times because this primary law, again, it can lack that background or historical context, and it can be complicated to kind of parse out the language because it will often include a lot of jargon and a lot of legalese. And this, of course, is where secondary sources can really shine. While secondary sources are not the law and generally won't be cited as authority in court documents, these resources provide analysis and commentary on the law that is often an excellent starting point for better comprehending a legal issue. So again, a patron who's using a book that's talking about a particular legal topic, they're going to have to understand that book is not the law, but it's a book that's going to tell them about the law, and it's going to talk about the law so that they can better understand the primary source. Right. So with that said, let's take a more detailed look at secondary sources and particularly what's available in the legal field when it comes to secondary sources. As I mentioned earlier, these resources come in many different formats, with some appearing as small paperback books and others as large, sometimes multi-volume treatise sets. Each of these secondary sources has its own strengths and unique usefulness to a researcher. Right, so and some of the goals and purposes of secondary sources are to guide the reader to relevant primary authority in a certain area of law while also providing context for a better understanding of that legal issue. Right? And so I have a picture here of a South Carolina bar treatise that talks about the law of slip and fall accidents in South Carolina. And as an example, let's assume you're searching for the law that applies to these kinds of incidents in South Carolina. If you were searching for the individual South Carolina statutes and cases that are applicable in this area, that would mean searching with only the information that you have to begin with, perhaps only by keyword. And it would take you considerable time to locate each item and to read it and to kind of ponder its relevance. And, again, you might not have all of the background information or context to really help you know what's relevant when you first get started. And, I would compare that to the considerable time saved if a researcher discovers that the South Carolina Bar treatise is available and that it discusses the law that relates to slip and fall accidents. While the researcher will still need to thoroughly review the law in this area, this book will provide a wealth of context as well as citations to many of the statutes and cases that they would otherwise need to find and analyze on their own. It's going to be an excellent introduction to that area of law and provide them a great starting place. And again, even if they don't have all the information at the beginning, it's great to have somewhere to start, and this will help someone fill in the gaps. And that brings me right into some of the limitations of secondary sources. So as I started to get into in the last slide, patrons might need to be filling in gaps in their research. And one of the limitations of a secondary source is the currency of that resource. And that is to say, when was this secondary source published or last revised? Some materials may be updated by paper supplements or perhaps updated through an online companion website, but this isn't always going to be the case. For example, the book that I mentioned on the previous slide, that book on South Carolina slip and fall accidents, that book was published in 2014. That means that there are potentially 6 years or more of cases, statutes, and other legal developments that a researcher would need to examine in order to be confident that he or she was well informed in this area of the law. Still, consulting this book first is well worth the time, again, since it has provided us with that information up to that point in 2014, and it will have provided valuable primary law references and analysis. Again, having a place to start is always a good thing, and if you can find a few good cases in one area when you're performing legal research, oftentimes you'll be able to use those cases as a springboard to be able to locate any newer cases or point you back towards older primary law. A second consideration that I have listed here is comprehensiveness. And again, this gets back to the different formats that secondary sources can come in. In this point, we're talking about how much detail does the secondary source aim to provide, and who is the intended audience. At the law school library, we have books from a series generally referred to as nutshell books. With titles like Contract Law in a Nutshell, these books are small, concise handbooks, and they aim to condense a lot of information into a small book. I often tell students that this is the kind of book you'd want to take with you on a flight. It is intended to familiarize someone with an area of the law in a short period of time. This portability, of course, means trading depth of treatment for concise writing, but it makes sense for someone who needs a quick overview. Compare this type of resource to a 10-volume treatise set on the same topic. While the large set can certainly provide more detail and may answer more of your questions, it definitely isn't intended to be something that's studied quickly and in its entirety. Therefore, keep in mind what your patrons will benefit most from when selecting secondary sources. The types of secondary sources I'll be talking about today are legal dictionaries, legal encyclopedias, law review and journal articles, books and treatises, practice aids, self-help materials, and finding aids. As we talk about each type, I'd also like to remind everyone of the need to avoid giving legal advice and to avoid the unauthorized practice of law when you're assisting patrons with legal research questions. In our first legal research webinar in this series, my colleague Terry Conroy noted that we cannot attempt to perform tasks such as explaining the application of the law to a patron situation, filling out forms for them, or explaining the meaning of legal terms. As we'll see, however, helping a patron locate relevant secondary sources can be very useful to their research and can actually help them answer these questions on their own. Many times, after guiding a patron to a good secondary source, their next question will be where to find the copiers because they found something that can help them. Our first category are legal dictionaries, and these are perfect for addressing a patron's question about the meaning of a legal term or phrase. One of the most well-known legal dictionaries is Black's Law Dictionary, which is available in print or through subscription services like Westlaw. Free online legal dictionaries, such as Nolo's Dictionary, are also available. For example, the screenshot on this slide highlights the definition of the term literary works as it appears in Nolo's free dictionary of terms and legal definitions, which is available at the link on this slide. Legal encyclopedias discuss many different legal topics, although in limited detail, and include references for further research. This makes a legal encyclopedia a great general resource to offer a patron who is beginning their research, or to someone who would like to survey the law of a particular jurisdiction. There are legal encyclopedias in print that cover the entire United States, such as American Jurisprudence Second or Corpus Juris Secundum, and state-specific legal encyclopedias, such as South Carolina Jurisprudence, pictured on this slide, or Strong's North Carolina Index. Online options for accessing legal encyclopedias include subscription databases, as well as free resources like the WEX Online Encyclopedia, linked on this slide, that is maintained by Cornell Law School's Legal Information Institute. And a legal encyclopedia like the one I have pictured here, again, this is South Carolina Jurisprudence, the general legal encyclopedia for our state, and this is one of the kinds of materials that might be good to include if you were putting together a basic legal collection, because this is going to provide some good general information on a broad spectrum of topics that could be helpful to a patron who's just trying to get their bearings and looking for more research references in a particular area of law. The next category I have for us is law review and journal articles. Now, these can be great resources for patrons that are conducting academic research or they're seeking analysis of novel legal issues. These resources often include good background information and citations to primary law. Law reviews include more general coverage. They'll talk about a number of different areas of the law, and journals, on the other hand, will probably specialize in a single area of law, perhaps law and education or labor and employment law. State bar associations may also publish their own journals, magazines, or newsletters, such as the South Carolina Lawyer Magazine, which is made available online for free by the South Carolina Bar. Law reviews and journals are available in print through online subscription services like Hein Online, or through free online sources like Google Scholar. And as a quick example, I'd like to jump out of the PowerPoint presentation for a moment, and I'd like to show you what this looks like on the South Carolina Bar's website. And it's really an interesting thing that the bar has done, and it's great that they provide this access for everyone. So you can see they have a number of back issues that are available. And as I mentioned, one of the things that this type of resource can be helpful for is, since these kind of materials are periodicals, these can provide coverage on either new legal issues or something that's happened very recently. A lot of times you'll find articles on emerging technology and issues that the courts might not have had a chance to address through a formal opinion. So there's a lot available here. The bar's made them available to view online in kind of a digital ebook style format. And some of them are pretty neat and have interesting covers. I especially like the July 2017 issue. That one talks about the Americans with Disabilities Act and service animals. And we got that fun cover of some pets in a law firm. So some interesting materials available, and again, the bar has made those available to view online for free. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and bring us back into the presentation. All right. So the next category that I'd like to highlight is a very large category. This is books and treatises, and this category considers publications that are going to analyze a certain area of the law, such as criminal law, family law, employment law, many different topics. And they're going to cover these areas in varying degrees. And this includes everything from, again, small paperback books to multi-volume treatise sets. And these can be wonderful resources to suggest to a patron for beginning research on their legal issue. And books and treatises are going to include analysis, references to primary law, and can potentially include forms or sample documents. And I would invite everyone to remember to check the index and table of contents as you're assisting patrons with browsing these types of materials. This is especially helpful if what you're looking for is featured in different terms. For example, the state or federal law that the patron is researching may not be worded in exactly the way that you might think it would be, or the legislature may have used different terms than what you're expecting. So the index and table of contents are going to be very helpful, and if the patron's not finding what they need using a specific term, it might be a good idea for them to browse and think of synonyms for that word or other ways that it could be worded within that publication. Like other secondary sources, books and treatises can be written for either a national audience or for a specific state or jurisdiction. The South Carolina Bar publishes many helpful treatises which can be found for purchase on its website. Books and treatises are available again in many forms and can be found in print, online through subscription databases, and perhaps also online in ebook format. And good places to look for examples of these publications, again, would be to visit publisher websites or to browse online catalogs, such as the online catalog of the University of South Carolina Law Library or other law libraries, to see what kind of materials they've selected for their collections and could be useful to you as well. One book that I'd like to share that I've found to be helpful is the Paralegal Survival Guide, Facts and Forms, 2nd edition. And this has been a helpful book for a few years, and I'm hopeful that there'll be a new edition coming because, as I'll talk about in a moment, this book is starting to fall into that category of one of the weaknesses of secondary sources, in that it's starting to become an older book. But one of the ways that this book's been helpful to me is, unfortunately, since there are not always court-approved forms for every legal issue, in some cases it's necessary to either draft a document or use the available primary law, or find an example or other template to help someone that is wanting to move forward with a legal proceeding or legal issue where they need to draft their own form. This book includes information on many areas of South Carolina law and includes some sample forms as well as some examples of legal documents. Granted, there is a disclaimer on the book as well for those forms and examples that are not explicitly approved by the South Carolina Judicial Branch. And I do want to remind everyone, remember, it is the patron who must decide if a certain form is appropriate for his or her legal issue. Even if the form looks like it is what the patron needs, you may not know all of the details of their situation. When I suggest this book to a patron, I'm careful not to imply that the forms included are the forms they should use. It's just one resource they can consider. Again, a consideration when using this book is its publication date, 2010. A patron using this book should conduct additional research to see if any changes have occurred or if new forms or relevant revisions have been made or created since 2010. However, I've often found it's good, again, to be able to provide some kind of example, some kind of starting point that can get someone started with their research. Again, if you're looking for books that could be helpful to your patrons, you can browse publisher websites or the online catalogs of other libraries to see what they've included in their collections. Other types of materials that can be helpful include practice aids, and these are usually published to assist attorneys with their law practice. These can include things like continuing legal education materials. Oftentimes these would be seminars or conventions or educational programs that attorneys are putting together with other attorneys in mind that are seeking to update them on developments in the law. I could use something, for example, like the tax changes that have happened with the new tax law that went into effect a couple of years ago. Things like that, things that will bring attorneys up to speed on changes to the law. These may or may not be available, or there may be publications that are published as follow-ups to that. Those would fall into this practice aids category. This would also include things like large form book sets. There are some that are in the series of American jurisprudence that will be general form books or general trial preparation books that attorneys might use as they're getting ready to prepare a client's case. And something like the general form book could be helpful to offer to a patron as a starting point. However, some of these materials might be a little bit too specialized for general use. Self-help books are generally published for non-lawyer audiences and might be useful if there's a particular legal question on an area of law that your library is often asked about. An example I can show in later on in this presentation relates to copyright law and books that are kind of made to help someone who's seeking to get their own copyright and kind of walk them through those steps. Publishers like NOLO have a good number of these kind of self-help books. Also, finding aids like online guides are useful for suggesting resources that can help your patrons, especially over the phone or through web chat reference. And a lot of times these are things that we might already be doing, but due to the current COVID-19 situation and a lot of the remote work that's been going on, I find it helpful to have a link that I can provide to a patron, and I might be talking to someone over web chat through our reference chat feature, and they're looking for the law in a particular area, and I can easily provide them that link, and it's got a lot of the materials already gathered up in that single resource to give them that good starting point. All right. So that then brings me to our topical research guides, and I would like to take us out of the PowerPoint here so we can see a few of these on the web. One of the ones that I wanted to highlight for everyone as an example was our copyright guide. All right, now bring the tab up for us. All right, so this is our Circuit Riders Legal Research Training Guide, and one of the tabs here is Legal Research by Topic, and this includes a number of different areas of law that we would commonly get questions about, and so we decided to put them together on one page. And this isn't all of our guides, but again, these are some of the ones that we are frequently getting questions on. And I'd like to highlight for us our copyright law for librarians page. And a few of the different areas that this kind of guide can come in handy for are, again, gathering up links to primary law, but also potentially some helpful secondary sources. All right. So some of the things that we'll find here are statutory law, regulatory law, and case law relating to copyright. And copyright is a federal issue. However, we also have some materials linked relevant to state law as well in this area. Alongside the primary law, we also have some suggestions for secondary sources, some books in this area. And to the left of the screen, there are a number of materials that are potentially helpful for someone who's thinking about copyright issues in a school or in a library, and how to best use materials. And to the right of the screen, here towards the bottom of the page, we have a box that's dedicated to resources to help someone who is trying to get permission to use a copyright or registering their own copyright. This includes links to the United States Copyright Office, their registration portal, some of their frequently asked questions, as well as some of these self-help books. And again, a lot of these listed here are from that Nolo publishing company that publishes a lot of good self-help materials. But these are going to aim to help someone walk through that copyright registration process. So by sending someone the link to this page, I'm able to give them some starting points on primary law sources, as well as some secondary sources to help them with different issues within copyright law. All right, and I'll take us back to the main topical page here, and I'd like to ask if anyone has any interest in seeing any of these guides in particular on a particular topic. We can look at a couple of those. If you have a suggestion based on what's on this page, I'd ask if you could please put that in the chat, or I can, let me go back here, or I've got a couple in mind that I can share as well. All right, I'm seeing in the chat that not able to see the list. I should have. Oh, I think I know what's going on. Thank you for that. It's sharing the screen where I clicked to go there, but it opened in a new tab. I apologize about that. All right, now we should be sharing the correct tab. I apologize about that. But these are the different topics that we have, again, under that Circuit Riders tab. And hopefully earlier everyone was able to see that copyright law guide, and I see wills, trusts, and estates. All right, so we can explore that as a topic. All right, so again, similar to what we saw in the copyright law guide, we're going to be on this page gathering up sources that could help someone if they're preparing to either write a will or they're considering probate issues. We've got some estate planning resources to the right of the page, and to the left we have some links to South Carolina primary law, different chapters coming out of titles of the Code of Laws that could be helpful to someone starting their research. We have some suggested resources for finding cases to begin research either on state law or for federal cases. And we have some South Carolina specific resources, and a lot of these are materials published by the South Carolina Bar. And as you can see, there are a few different types of resources addressing different issues, and there are even some videos here from the South Carolina Judicial Department to help someone who's preparing for a day in probate court. All right, so that's a good example of some of the things that we can gather up to help someone in that area. Oh, and you're welcome. Thank you. Are there any other guides that anyone would like to see? All right. Well, all of these guides are available through our Circuit Rider's Guide on this topical page. Again, it's not all of the guides that we have, but these are some of the ones that we wanted to feature on particular issues. I'll show one more for everyone. We have a guide that's on general legal research and citation, and this includes some of our recommendations from our Building a Basic Legal Collection page, but some others as well. And we have some books here that are on legal research and citation in South Carolina generally, as well as materials that are kind of just generally helpful as starting points. And again, we have pictured there that South Carolina Jurisprudence Legal Encyclopedia, that paralegal guide that I mentioned earlier, as well as to the right of the page here, some basic legal research books that could be helpful with someone looking to begin their research. All right. All right, so I'll go ahead and bring us back into the presentation here. All right, so again, that topical research guides page is available in the Circuit Rider's Guide, and I have the direct link to that page as part of this presentation. Some other research guides that I'd like to highlight to everyone that we have are our free Internet Legal Resources Guide, the South Carolina Legal Resources Guide, our South Carolina Forms Index. These are a few that we end up referring people to that have some good general resources that people have found useful. I'll go ahead and pull one of these up for everyone. Our free Internet Legal Resources Guide aims to gather state and federal websites that provide kind of free access to legal information. Again, a lot of these are primary sources on this first page that, again, will be talked about more in later webinars. But we have information here for such as the GovInfo website, which has access to federal information like the United States Code, the statutes of the United States, the U.S. Constitution, the Code of Federal Regulations, things like that. We also have linked here that South Carolina Legislature website that I was talking about, and some different options for searching case law, such as the South Carolina Judicial Department website, as well as Google Scholar. Google Scholar works really well as a free resource if someone's looking for either case law or, as we saw earlier, this is somewhere where a patron could find journal or law review articles potentially as well. And up here on the tabs, we also have some secondary source options as well, such as dictionaries and encyclopedias, article and book options, and some search tools and legal news and current awareness tools. So a lot of information is available online, and sometimes it's just a matter of filtering through it and finding what's important to your patrons and showing them how to get that access. All right. Another page I'd like to show everyone is our South Carolina Legal Resources Guide. This guide aims to gather up materials specifically on South Carolina. We have a lot of focus on South Carolina in our collection, but we also wanted to have somewhere to highlight South Carolina resources online. And I don't want to take everyone's time to show you all of the different parts of this guide, but there are materials on a lot of different areas of South Carolina law, the different types of primary law. I do want to show you our superseded South Carolina Codes and Statutes page. This page has online access to older volumes of the South Carolina Code. And while it doesn't have everything, this page does cover the colonial period up through the 1952 Code in South Carolina. We unfortunately don't have the 1962 Code or the 1976 Code available for online access. We do have a link up at the top to the South Carolina Legislature's website, and again, that will give access to the text of the prior codes from the year 2000 up through 2017. But we have some other information here and some other suggested resources for that that should help someone better understand primary law in South Carolina. All right, and the last item that I have here to show everyone is our South Carolina Forms Index. And a lot of times court forms are a requested type of material for someone who's beginning their own legal research. Sometimes, as I mentioned with that paralegal survival guide, sometimes a patron may have to draft their own form. And to do that, they'll need to look to appropriate secondary sources and the primary law itself for guidance. So again, there won't always be a form for every legal issue. However, on this page, myself and some of my colleagues have added the court forms that are available on the website of the South Carolina Judicial Department, sccourts.org. That website provides the forms that the South Carolina court system has approved for use, and what we've added on this page are links to those forms, and we've added some additional index type terms at the top of the boxes to help someone be able to perform a Control F or Command F search of this page, kind of help them gather up these materials and try different words if what they're looking for initially doesn't work. In doing so, we've tried to be very careful because, again, as I noted, one of the things that we don't want to do as we are trying to avoid the unauthorized practice of law is we don't want to ever tell someone, yes, this is exactly the form you should use. We want to be able to show everyone what's available, and we want them to be able to find forms, but then the choice of which form to use and how to use it, again, that's ultimately up to the patron, and they will need to make that choice on their own. But again, we want to do all that we can to help them find forms and help them make that choice. All right, and I'll take us back into our presentation. All right, so one other thing I do want to note for everyone is, again, I've shown a lot of the University of South Carolina Law Library guides today. However, I do want to remind everyone that research guides are also available from other institutions and in other states. For example, one example I can think of is the University of North Carolina School of Law. Their law library maintains many different research guides on North Carolina law and legal topics. And so much like at the University of South Carolina Law Library, how we create guides to help with different concerns for South Carolina law, there are institutions and entities in other states that are creating resource guides for their information as well and for legal information in their state. So, so if you have a patron that needs to help a family member in Georgia look up Georgia law or Tennessee law or North Carolina law, and you don't have a book in your collection or an electronic resource that is helpful to them in finding that law, one of the things you can do or suggest to them is to look and see if there are research guides that have been provided by law schools or libraries or other organizations in those states that might be able to help them and give them that context and access to citations to primary law that a secondary source might otherwise provide. All right. And with all of that being said, that brings me towards the end of today's webinar, and I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and I hope that some of this information has been helpful to you. I've listed the other legal research webinar series titles to the right of this slide, and I hope you'll consider attending those sessions as well. You can contact the Law Library Reference Desk by email or by chat through our website, and you can connect with the Law Library on social media. Reference assistance in person and by phone is unfortunately unavailable due to the COVID-19 situation, but we hope to have those different reference avenues available as soon as possible once the situation's resolved. And with that, I'd like to open up discussion to any questions anyone might have, and I'll be glad to talk about any of the materials we discussed today.
Everyone can feel free to unmute if you would like to ask a question, if that's easier. I definitely thank you so much. What incredible work you do. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us today, especially during this difficult time. And some of the questions that I'm interested in is, you mentioned that you are in somewhat, I guess, working from home during this COVID-19 pandemic. What sorts of things are you seeing come through as far as reference?
Let's see. I was having a little bit of trouble hearing your audio, unfortunately. But were you asking about what types of questions that have been coming through?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of the questions that we've been able to assist with via email or through chat, some of those, unfortunately, we haven't been able to assist as much with without access to some of the materials in our print collection. One of the resources that I have still been able to provide is that link to our guide that has superseded South Carolina code volumes. We do get a good number of research questions that are related to what the law was in prior years. Thankfully, some of that, thankfully there are some of those requests that we can point our researchers to information on, such as the South Carolina code text from 2000 forward that's available through the South Carolina legislature website. So we are able to still assist with pointing researchers towards that information. Unfortunately, for some of the materials that kind of fall in that gap, that were questions involving the 1962 code or the 1976 code past the year 2000, some of those materials a little bit harder to get answers on because we would need access to our print volumes to be able to answer those questions. So we're still making use of our online guides to try and fill in as much information as we can. Otherwise, I'll highlight our topical guides because as we get questions by email, it's helpful not only to myself and my colleagues to have the links to these different websites and any kind of ebooks or online pamphlets or government information available in one place, but we can also very easily, in addition to providing a link to a website that might help someone answer their question, we can let them know that we have these online guides if they need more information in that area, or if they just would like to research further. So I would say that the topical guides have been a great resource for helping someone with general legal questions. And then if we get more specific questions, such as those related to items that would be in our print collection, sometimes we're able to use the electronic resources we have or what we have selected in our guides to be able to provide that information to people.
Are you seeing that any legal situation in terms of like the law changing drastically because of the pandemic?
Let's see. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the beginning of the question.
Are you seeing any particular changes to the law in response to the pandemic?
Oh, any questions that are in particular in response to the pandemic?
Yeah.
So far, not many that are directly related to health issues or not anything directly so far. There's some instances where we've gotten requests from individuals that that normally would have come into a library to find particular information, or perhaps they have a situation where they would want to find out information about another state where in the past they might have traveled, or they might have family there that could go and find something for them, but they're currently not traveling and wanting to stay home as much as possible. So we're getting, I think, some increasing questions based on kind of those parameters. I would anticipate that as the situation is ongoing, that resources such as labor and employment materials, business-related materials, and then perhaps some of those areas like that would have to do with medical concerns. Those, as the situation keeps going, we may have an increase in numbers of requests for those items. But so far, it's been pretty comparable to the types of questions that we would get before, be it that a lot of them are being asked remotely, and we're having to think of the best ways to answer back with our remote resources.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm grateful that you're able to continue your work during this time. Imagine, like a lot of us, we're finding normal out here.
And I do feel really lucky that we have the technology that we have today, not only to be able to communicate and to have webinars like today's event, but that there is so much information that's available online, and not only in terms of text and PDF documents, ebooks, things like that, but also in terms of video content and materials that we can provide not only to public patrons, but to members of the bench and bar, and also our students and our faculty at the law school, and to try and make sure that they're still able to access the information that they need to maintain their studies and to research topics of interest.
Thank you. Thank you so much again for sharing all of the information today. And we are coming up on time. Thank you for also letting us be aware of how to continue the conversation. I would like to remind everyone to join us for part 3 of this legal research multi-part series on Thursday, the 14th. The topic at that time will be local, state, and federal codes with reference to Librarian Ross, who is The entire series and more can be found at scla.org. And unless we have any last minute questions, I will wrap up and again thank our wonderful presenter and Glenn, and wish everyone that you stay well through this troubling time. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.